I'm going to show you now a very quick example of how to work with the editor. I'll reset the scene and I'll close the editor, closed in this case. If I update here, we see that we don't have any objects. So I'm going to create, let's say I'll create a sphere somewhere in the viewport. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy the normal, which in the case of PRT volume and PRT surface is being generated automatically from the surface of the reference mesh, and we'll copy it into the color channel. So let me create quickly a PRT volume, and then I'll add a Magma on top, and then I'll say I'm pressing some keys in order to create the nodes, but I'll explain how nodes are created a little bit later. I'm going to output to the color the normal, and you see immediately that the normal that was generated, in this case we're seeing the face normals. Later we'll be talking about the smoothed normals also, but right now we have the normal vector of each particle that was generated within this volume, copy it into the color channel. Now you have to keep in mind that the same thing could be done by opening here the modify editor. We can disable this and we can say copy channel, and you see the new implementation of the modifiers adds a new tab, says this is a copy channel. We'll be copying the normal into the color, and it does exactly the same. But the moment you start doing some more complicated things, like you want to modify this normal, for example, we want to multiply it by some factor. Let's say you want to make it 0.5, so it's less intense, and then you want to add to it some other color. I can add blue to the whole vector, for example, and change those values. And all those operations, like we don't have the old style modifiers for adding data, for example, to an existing channel and so on. We just had the scale, which does the multiplication, a copy, setting a channel to a floating point value and setting a channel to a vector value, and that was it. And we have the applied texture, which is still quite useful. But the moment you start doing more interesting things, or you want to produce, take only one of the components of the normal and then blend some colors with it and so on, all those things, Magma is your weapon of choice, and most of the time you won't really be using the old style modifiers anymore. We made sure that the old attributes, like extra attribute implementation, gets converted to the new modifiers when you open an old scene, but really we keep them around mostly for backwards compatibility. So how do you create nodes in Magma? You just saw me doing things without actually explaining how I do it, but let's take a look. Let's assume that we want to take these particles, take their position, and shift that position along the normal, which is the equivalent of a push. So that means we take the normal, multiply it by some floating point value, add to the position, and output as position. We have various possible approaches to create nodes. We can create them with the mouse, just clicking around the node depot. We can use the keyboard shortcuts in the node depot. We can use the mouse and right-click menus, the rec shortcuts, which are available for some of the nodes, but the most important ones at least. And some of the attribute editor parameters pretty much pop up with additional shortcuts that let you create new nodes and insert them into the existing flow. And you can mix all these workflows. Let's take a look at them and see how fast they operate, because some are better than others. Let's say that I wanted now to create an output, so I press Alt P for the output category, and then press P for the position, and I have my position. Then I say Alt I for input, then I press C for channel, and then I say P for position, and now position is going into position. So nothing is really changing, but I'm copying a channel into itself. At this point, I want to add something, so I press Alt A, then D, which sounds like add anyway. So Alt A, D does an add, and then I do, I want to add to this the normal, so I do Alt I, C, N, and to get the normal. And then I want to multiply that one, so it's again Alt A and then M for multiply. And now I want to add an input Alt I value V and then F for float, and this is my push. And if I start changing this value, the particles will be pushed along their normals and the object will grow. So this is the very basic, very in-your-face approach, because you see all the nodes at the bottom. But you could, of course, click with the mouse and do the same, and it might be even more accessible. You just go here and say, okay, where's the position? Here's the position. Now I need an input. You have to hit the channel here, and then you have to find the other position. I find this more clunky. So I have to find here the add. Here's the add, and then I go here again and say, hit that menu, please. And it's kind of tricky with the mouse. But eventually I might make it. I'll go here and say, okay, we'll multiply this one. Here's the multiply, and then we say import channel from that one. I want the float, and I got exactly the same flow, but that was a little bit trickier than using the keys, I find. Now, another way to do this, a little bit more in context here, is right-click anywhere in the editor and say, I want the output. And you notice that this list, other than the other, is not alphabetical, but it's actually in the most probable order of channel access. Most of the time you want position and color and so on, so we added them on top of the list. So you go here and say I want position input, then it will be the same, position is on top, then I click here and say I want to add, and then I can click, or the alternative approach as mentioned, you can drag directly from sockets and say when you release, the connection will be defined, and you go here and say, yeah, I want actually to find where is the normal, here it is, and then I can right-click here and say I want to multiply this guy, and the new node will be inserted right behind it, and then I drag from here and say input value float, and I got it. This is more exploratory and very useful. For example, if you want to branch something and send something to another output, you can just drag here and go and say, yeah, I want this to output through the density channel or something. It says you cannot do that because this is a vector and doesn't accept that format. We'll talk about the errors a little bit later. But if I want to set the color, for example, to the normal multiplied by that value, when I'm doing it, the color will be changing, will be multiplied, and output to the color, and the position will be done. So using the dragging from sockets actually and the right-click menus is a very neat way to be interactive without having to constantly go down to the depot. But I personally prefer using shortcuts whenever I know them, and most of the time I know them because I wrote them. But in general, when you know how to directly hit some keys and get a channel, you can create things much faster. So let's say that I wanted to create exactly the same flow using keyboard shortcuts. Shift and Control held together, and then the first letter of the channel name creates the output channel. So if I hit Shift and Control and P, I get the output. If I press on the Shift and the letter, I get the input. If I press the plus key on the numpad, I get the add. And then if I press Shift and N, I get the normal. And if I press the multiply on the numpad, I get the multiply. And Control and 1 creates 1 as a float. Shift and 1 creates red. And only 1 without any modifier keys creates an integer with that value. And that applies to most of the keys on the top number row of the keyboard. So let me do this again without talking. And this is how fast you can create if you know what you're doing. So basically, I don't even know how the broadcast translates that, because yesterday I watched the recording of the previous video, and it's almost impossible to tell when the keyboard shortcut was pressed because it happens so fast. So in general, when you know the shortcut to a channel or operator, use it and it will save you time. And you probably notice that I'm barely connecting anything. Basically, we did this example without dragging or connecting with the mouse any of the sockets. And this is because we're trying to minimize the amount of drags with the mouse. It's still kind of tricky to hit a small target, even though we made the socket specifically kind of large compared to the Max version. And they are much easier to use, but still, if you select a node and you want to insert a node behind it, you can either select a wire and hit a key. For example, if I want to divide this by something, I just hit the divide key and it gets inserted and connected. And I can remove it from that connection. And if I wanted to add another another operator, but not insert it into this flow, I can hit the insert key on the numpad, and you'll notice that this list is changing to branch. If I now hit the divide key, that node will be added as a new branch, and I can continue. And it's at the bottom because I'm reordering right now, and when we reorder, unconnected to an output nodes get sorted at the bottom or on the left if I request that. So connecting is still possible with the mouse, of course. I can drag this connection and disconnect it, and I can drag and connect it, or I can go here and just grab the end and put it here, and it will just connect there. And of course, I can grab this end and connect it somewhere else. So you can still use the mouse as you used to, and you can delete connections, select them, delete them, and so on. But in many cases, you can just say, okay, I want to, if I create a node like this, and I want to connect it to this guy, I can select both with holding the control key, hit the space bar, and it connects. They are ordered in the opposite way because of the automatic reordering. So if I put this guy here, and I have created some other input, and I want that one to connect there, I just select both and hit space, and it connects from the first output to the first empty input of the other node. If I have two nodes that are of the same category, that means these guys here are inputs, and this is a modifier, an operator which has inputs and outputs. So the order in this case is kind of clear. This guy has to go into an input because the only thing it has is an output. But when I have two side by side, if this is on the left and this is on the right, and select the true and hit space bar, it's going to connect the output to the input nodes from left to right. If I'm going to switch to cross mode so I can easier connect and select stuff. If I switch the order from left to right and select these guys, then the add will go to the divide and not the other way around, because we're going left to right. And as you can see, there are lots of automatic ways that you can basically use in order to minimize the number of dragging of wires, but you can still use the mouse whenever it feels necessary. The other thing that you can do is, in many cases, you might not want something to be applied. For example, let's say that I'll multiply this so we can see the actual push happening. Let's say that I want to disable the push. One thing that I can do is I can go to the output and uncheck the enable checkbox. I can, of course, disable the whole Magma, but if I had multiple outputs and only one of those outputs has to be suppressed, for example, once again, I'll create a color, and I'll say the normal should be going to the color and the position should be pushed. Right now, the position is not pushed, but the color is still applied. I can enable the position and disable the color, and so on. And I can, of course, select the two nodes and press Control P, which is the shortcut for pass-through, and that toggles on and off the enable and disable. So if this is on and off, and select both and start pressing the key, they will be inverted. The same applies to any other node. For example, if I want to pass the position into the position without adding the normal, I can go to the add and press Control P, and it will pass through. So the position passes through this operator without being modified, and then ends up in the position just like before. So instead of suppressing the output, I suppress one specific operation. The same way, I can add the normal, but I might want to skip the actual multiplication and press Control P, and the multiply is now disabled, and it passes through, and you can see by the color of the socket what data actually passes through. This one doesn't go in. If I wanted to remove a node permanently from the flow because I don't like it, but I still want it to remain in the editor, I can do that easily. I'm going to switch to the branch mode here, and you see in branch mode this output is ordered below the previous branch of the previous output. If I go to blocks, it's trying to push all the nodes to be kind of together, but the output is still at the bottom. And if I go to compact, this output won't keep a space from the previous one. Everything gets pushed up, so it's a little bit more compact display. But I'll keep it at in branches mode. And if I go now and select this node and press Shift Backspace, This node will be removed from the flow, but the flow will remain okay, because the connection wasn't broken. It was just the way it was passing through. It was actually let stay there, and the multiply node was removed. If I want to bring it back, I can select this connection, select this node with Control pressed, so both are now selected. I press the space bar, and it gets reintroduced in the same place. If I want to remove it permanently and not keep it in the editor at all, I can press just the backspace key, and now it gets deleted, but the connection is still valid. I'll press Control Z to come back, or for the US fellows out there, Control Z, and I'm going to undo the change, and now I'm going to press the delete key. And if I press the delete key, not only the node will be deleted, but also all its connections. So in this case, that connection that I had before, the normal going out there, it's lost, so nothing is really being added. 000 is being added to the position. I'll go back with Control Z, and you'll notice that I can press Control Z as many times as I want. It's actually a disk-based undo stack, and each editor has its own. It's completely independent from the undo of Maya. So I can undo Maya operations, but the Magma is independent. And if you have 2 or 3 or more editors open at the same time, each editor has its own undo stack, and they don't step on each other's toes. So within the current session, if I close this editor and open it again, it will forget all the undo information. But while it's open, anything from the very beginning, I can keep hitting Control Z, and it will come back to pretty much anything that I've done since I started creating this flow. Okay, we saw how we can pass through and delete temporarily or permanently or completely, with including the wires. A couple of words about selecting nodes. If I want to select all the nodes, I can press Control A and they get selected. If I press Control U, only the unconnected nodes will be selected, so that's an easy way to delete them quickly without hunting for them. They are ordered at the bottom anyway, and they're easy to find, and they're darker shaded, but still, I'll go back and bring them with Control Z. If I wanted to, okay, I press Control U to select those. If I want to get only the connected, the active nodes that actually do something, I press Control I, and that inverts the selection. And of course, I can see all the nodes properties, attributes in the attributes panel. And there are a couple more. Control Alt and I selects all the inputs. So the 2 channels and the 1 float, which are considered inputs, got selected. If I press the same with O, Control Alt and O selects the outputs. Right now I have only 1. If I had more, Shift Control C and then Control Alt O, both get selected, and I can modify the attributes of all the outputs at once. So you can find these selection options actually in the menu here, so I don't have to remember everything.